Okay, welcome to another iPad painting tutorial. On today's tutorial I'm going to paint a nice green sunrise, summer scene with some really nice luscious green colours. So I am using an iPad and the app Procreate, but if you have a different tablet and use different apps, I'm sure you can take some of the techniques and apply them to whatever you use. Now in terms of what I'm using on Procreate, I've opened an A4 canvas. So it's just a 297mm by 210mm at 300 dpi. It is the default settings. In terms of the brushes I'm going to be using for this tutorial, I'm going to use the airbrushing soft brush, not the smaller soft brush, but the larger one at the top. So it's not the soft airbrush, but it's the soft brush within airbrushing. I'm going to also use the medium brush. Within the artistic section, I'm going to use the leatherwood brush. I've already pre-selected some colours. If I show you these, just clear those. So these are the colours that I'm planning to use. Please bear in mind that the camera that I'm using may oversaturate and slightly distort the colours, but if you take a note of either the hexadecimal codes that are down in the video description, you can type them in here one at a time. The colour appears up here and you just tap together your own palette. Or next to the codes, there is a link that takes you to my Patreon and you can download the colour file for free anyway. You'll also find links to my Instagram and a Facebook group, so you can tag me or join the group, share your own work, and give and receive feedback from all the members, as well as myself. And with all that said and done, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do on my first layer, go to my colours. I'm going to pick this first blue. Very simply, I'm just going to drag, flood fill that entire layer. Now that's a very bright blue, so we're going to have to now subdue it. So we're going to create another layer. Click the little plus symbol to do that. Go to the colour, select the second colour. If I go to the colour disc, you'll see it's almost white, but it's not quite. It's still within the very light blue. I'm going to go to my brushes, airbrushing, soft brush, tap out. I'm going to put it at around 15% size and 100% opacity. And about halfway, I'm going to draw a line all the way across. Doesn't need to be particularly straight. Go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur it to about the 70%. And I'm going to go back to my layers, slide the layer, duplicate it. And it just doubles the strength. But I don't want to have too many layers if I can help it, so I'll tap on the top layer, merge down, and now the two layers are condensed into one layer. But looking at it, I think I want to push it even further, so I'm going to slide again, duplicate that again, and I think that I'm happier with that overall. I think it's getting the level of brightness that I want. I'm going to do the same thing again, tap on the layer, merge down. So now we still have that on one layer. Sometimes when you do that, you'll notice little anomalies, kind of banding that you might not want. So all you need to do to get rid of some of that is go back to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just blur it in a little bit more. So I'm going to put it up to about 10%, and that's plenty pretty much to get rid of the majority of that. A little bit of texture in the sky is no bad thing. If some of it remains and you get a slight mottling, well, it adds texture to the sky anyway, and that's good. Back to my layers, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to stay on the same colour, and I'm going to stay on the soft brush, but I am going to turn it down to a much smaller size, to about the 2%. I'm also going to turn the opacity down really quite low to about 15%. And just in the top section, I'm just going to add lightly. Now, although it's on 15% opacity, there's a difference between pressing on firmly and pressing on lightly. So you can see the level of pressure that you apply makes a big difference, as well as the opacity. So I'm pressing lightly, and I'm just creating some hints of wisps of cloud that may just cut through some of these areas. I'm just keeping my hand moving in a sweeping motion, whilst at the same time doing some taps and dashes with the Apple Pencil. And I can do that a few times, make a few passes, and maybe some slightly lower down as well. Again, just keep them moving. I don't need to do too much of this, just to get the kind of sense of some clouds cutting through here. It's not going to be a particularly noisy cloud environment. It's just going to be wisps and hints of things. And then we can turn it down just to the lower part of 2%. So it's a little bit narrower. And then as we get just a little bit lower down nearer the horizon, we can just have some slightly thinner shapes. I think that will work. And again, I'm pressing quite lightly, so you're barely going to notice these really. And we're going to add more light to the sky as well, so it's really going to bleach these out and you'll hardly notice them, but it's better than a completely flat sky. I think it just adds a level of interest. So I'm going to put it back up to the 2% again, maybe just extend it a little bit further. Again, keeping that sweeping motion so it cuts through. Something like that. Okay, So I'm going to go back to my layers, create another layer. Now I'm going to add all sorts of light effects with the sun rays and other things, but I'm going to create the land first and the different layers before we add the really dramatic light to the scene. So I'm going to go to my colours, I'm going to go to the first colour on the second row, go to my brushes, and go to the medium brush, and with a brush size of around 10% and opacity around 70%, I'm just going to create a band that cuts through, and this is going to be my kind of horizon line in the distance. It's going to be a layer of trees, and I'll just go over it a couple of times just to get the overall sense of how it cuts through. Doesn't need to be any detail on it particularly. And because we're working digitally rather than a traditional medium, if you're not happy with where you placed it, you don't have to necessarily start again. You can just go to the transform tool and you can move it to wherever you feel most happy with it. And I'm just going to move it down just a little bit so it's really around the halfway point. I think I've done it just a little bit too high, and that's fine. So once we've got that band in, then I'm going to switch my brush to the artistic leatherwood brush. I'm going to put it down to 2% size and keep it at the 70% opacity. And I'm just going to go along this top area and create a top edge, creating areas of foliage, treetops, and it's really quite easy to do, and you can probably hear the tapping motion that I'm using for this top edge, but it's not something you need to be too refined about at all. So it's quite a quick stage in the process, this. I'm just going to do that all the way across. So you might have a couple of trees that really stick up and stand out, but then you could have dips, peaks and troughs. Again, don't agonize over this. Now sometimes people have a go at these tutorials and then they may zoom into their own work, and you see here in this tutorial I'm not really zooming in, but when you do zoom into yours, you may find that the level of detail is not huge, and you might get a slight fuzziness to some details, and that's because I'm just getting you to the overall effect. If you want to spend some extra time getting the details, putting in those little fine branches and whatever details that is really going to help clarify and give better detail to your own work, then please feel free to do that. But I'm just trying to get you to the place where it looks pretty decent as an effect in as few stages as possible. So I'm just going to go down to the third layer and the last colour. It's a slightly lighter colour. I'm going to use that now, and I'm just going to, I mean, it is really subtle this, but I'm just going to go in there and create hints that there's extra layers of things in there, and you're barely going to see it, but I do think that the eye notices these things. I think the absence of subtle textures in and amongst areas in a painting, I think it just tells you that there's something a bit flat and a bit lifeless about them. And as much as we're going to cover up much of this with the light effect, I think just hints of extra highlights in the lower tree foliage areas is going to just sell the illusion a little bit more. We're going to create another layer, go back to our colours, and I've used the first colour on the middle row. I did skip to that, but we're going to go back to the middle row. I'm going to use the second colour along now, which is a darker colour, and I'm going to use that now. And again, it's really subtle, but I'm going to use it still with the leatherwood brush, still at 70% opacity. In fact, let's turn it up 100% because it really is subtle, and without a little extra strength, you're not going to notice it. And we're just going to take this dark colour now and have it pretty much going along the bottom section. So if I zoom in a little bit, you'll notice there's a dark section there now. I'm just going to cut it all the way across just to create some layers. Now, having said that, you might get some features here that, although you're not going to notice it very strongly, you might get some taller bits of lower lying things, and then not so much in another area, and vary it up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to choose the third colour along now. I'm going to go back to my brushes, the airbrushing, and I'm going to use the medium brush. I'm going to set it to around 6%, and I'll keep it at the 70% opacity. And I'm just going to start bringing in a little more carefully now where it joins at this point. I'm just going to set a dark green background, and then I can add some lighter greens on top of it. So I'm just carefully starting to tidy up that bottom edge a little bit. I'm going to go in with lighter greens, so you don't need to be absolutely neat, but it just starts to separate the areas now, and I think the darker base is a good place to start. I'll just turn the size of it up now that we've got past that section, and we'll just start to fill that in. Doesn't need to be completely filled, we'll just do like that. And I'll keep that as a separate layer, so I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. Go to my colours, I'm going to choose the fourth colour in now. We'll keep on the medium brush, but we'll turn it down to the 2% size, and we're also going to turn the opacity down to about 25%. And with this lighter green, I'm just going to start now piecing in just some sweeping sections of this green, just to start helping to bring out separate sections and areas and just sways of different tones that cut through. Again, you know, you're not looking to create straight lines particularly, because we do have natural elements here, so you're going to get dips and rolls within that, so you don't have to be excessively neat with this, so it's great. And we're just lightly going to cut some lines across, maybe start to create some separation here. Don't get bogged down in that too much, just the hints of it. Then maybe within that section I can just, again, just create some very, very light separations of those green tones. Just going to go over that top section, just make it a bit more vivid. You know, I've got it at the low opacity of 25% so that I can keep going over it without really worrying that I'm going to overdo things. I mean, it's still possible to overdo things, but it takes many more passes with the pencil just to get it up to that stage. So you're more likely to notice as you go along any mistakes that you're making. If you're pushing it too far, you'll kind of likely notice before you've got too far along. So you can just see I'm creating some sweeping motions, and I can even turn it up now. Now we're getting a bit closer to us. So I've got about 4%. I can just start to create some more sections of tone. We're going to go over this with a much lighter tone anyway, so it doesn't really matter too much, but you're starting to build up some of that texture. I'll create a new layer, go back to my colours, and I'm going to go for the fifth colour along this time. Turn it back down to the 2% size, and not so much in this top section, but in this section now, just a little bit back from the edge in the middle area, but then I'm going to have it just touch the top of that edge as we get further along. So we're just getting a really nice clear separation now between this lighter green and the darker that's immediately behind it. So there are some edges where I want it really nice and crisp, so we use a smaller brush for that. And then, you know, I don't care about particular neatness because we're going to go in and really rough the texture up and break it up and add layers of texture to this anyway. So if you're creating a series of dashes and keeping it quite sketchy at this point, then that actually will work in your favour. I'm just bringing it across too, and then as it gets into this section, I'll just let it break up a little bit more, and then I'll come back and continue to add to that effect. But I'm going to add some more over here now, and maybe just a hint more of this near the top edge, but not too much. And then increasingly more of this in this section, and it's going to start joining up with this bit as well. Again, it is on low opacity of 25, but it's not that low, so if I press on hard, you're going to see really too crisp. So I'm doing more of this, and you can see the difference. I'm building it up very gradually compared to when I press on. I do tend to have quite a light touch with the Apple Pencil, so if you're slightly more heavy-handed and you struggle with that, then you can always just modify the percentage that I'm using down just a few percent so that you're more likely to get these light effects. Now, the percentages I give you because of the variable of the hand pressure is only an estimate. So it gives you a rough kind of ballpark, but it's never going to be exactly possible to match the pressure and opacity that I'm showing you. And that's, you know, unless it's 100%, then really it's going to vary quite considerably depending on how you approach it. And even at 100%, I can press lightly. So, you know, there's a big difference even when you've got the opacity set to 100%. So I'm putting it at 25. It gives you a general idea of how you might approach it, but it might vary depending on how you work. Again, I'm actually resting my hand on here. Now it's set so that my fingers won't do anything other than the general gestures. So I can allow my hand to sort of slide across the screen, and it gives me that evenness. It allows me to do slightly longer gestures. Again, if you press on too much, in fact I don't mind the way that looks, but if you do press on too much, then just backtrack. I quite like that, in fact. Sometimes you get happy accidents. There isn't necessarily an absolute right and wrong for these things. Now, as I come further down, I'm just going to allow it to become a little bit more broken. You're going to notice the texture in the grass more, so you're going to get fewer of the long sweeps and you're going to get more broken texture as we get closer to us. I don't want to do too much of that until I've got the tree in position, and then that's going to guide us and give us a sense of where to put the shadows and where to have some of the light showing through. So back to my colours. I do have this yellowy colour, so it's the 6th along. We'll create a new layer before we use it, and very similar to what we were just doing, still at the same settings of 2% size and 25% strength, opacity. I'm just adding a hint of that yellower colour in here as well. In fact, I might turn that down so it's really at the lowest part of 2%, just before it nudges into 1. And I might just do a bit more sparing, and I'm also creating slightly smaller dashes and points for this. Again, just enhancing that sense of texture a little bit more. You can hear again the tapping. I'm using generally left to right sweeping, but I'm also combining it with the tapping. You don't want to press on too hard either. Okay, I can go back into that background and add more to it, but I'm going to create a layer on top, and I'm going to go back to my colours. I'm going to choose the last colour on the bottom row, and I'm going to start adding in a tree. Now, the brush I'm going to use is the medium brush still. I'm going to have it at the 2% size and put it up to about 80%. So I'm going to start at the base of my tree, and we're going to have it going from the grass area all the way up into the sky. So I'm just going to lay down a couple of really thin branches initially, so they're thicker at the base of the tree and the tree trunk, and then they get thinner as they go. And then I'm going to add another one, maybe running slightly alongside it, press really lightly near the top. Now, in theory, they should get thinner at the top, but I'm just kind of releasing the pressure. If I zoom in, you'll see it's a little bit crude, a little bit fuzzy. This is the kind of area where you could reduce it down to the 1% and get really fine tuned with the branches here, and really spend time with the zoomed in and concentrate on these branches. Now, I'm not going to do so much of that for this tutorial. I'm just trying to get you to the effect as quickly as possible, but just know that, you know, if you want to spend longer on it, then you can do that. But I'm just keeping it at the lowest part, 2%, and I'm going to concentrate on the general effect of the branch. I'm pressing lightly just so I can feel confident that it's working enough for me. Now, do bear in mind that tree branches get consistently thinner as they go along, so you're going to get a thickness of branch near the trunk, and as they branch off, then each time it branches off, you're going to get a slightly thinner version of the branch. Now I can go back in, I can add more branches to this, but I'm also going to work into it with some foliage. So I'm just going to slightly firm up some of these branches, and then I'll start with some foliage. Trees do take a little bit of practice, so give yourself some time if necessary. So I'm going to go back to the layer below the trees, layer 9, click the plus symbol, and I'm going to change the properties of this layer. So in this area here where you've got the tick, you've got a little N, and then you tap on it and you can scroll down to where it says add. Tap out of it, and now you can see it's changed from an N to an A. I'm going to go to my brushes, use the soft brush. I'm going to have it up to about 10%, but I'm going to turn the opacity really low to about 5%, and I'm going to go to this colour here, which is this orangey yellow, and I'm just going to start bringing in some of this colour. And it's a new layer, but it's behind the tree, and it's really going to help us see what we've got with the tree. It's going to bring some of that luminosity through, which is going to help the scene massively. And you don't need to worry about it going over the top of any of the details. That was always the plan. So this is really going to be dramatic, and I can just take this across left to right, and it just really gives a center stage for that tree. And I can go along the top edge of that canopy, and it's really going to just continue pushing that further back, and it really starts to help bring in a sense of distance, and also gives a a reason why it's so illuminated here now. It's starting to make sense of it a little bit more. Now, I don't want to do too much into the sky. You can see where it's gone over into the sky area. It's really starting to change that blue, which I don't mind it happening to a certain extent, but you just need to be a little bit mindful that you don't want to do too much of that. One thing I can do to resolve that, if I feel it's done too much, is I can go to my eraser, which is here. Before I tap on it, I'm just going to be mindful that I've been using the soft brush and I might have had the eraser on a different brush setting. So in order to continue with the same type of texture, I'll press and hold on the eraser. Then when I do go to check it, it's also now using the soft brush. Having said that, the size of it and the strength of it will be set to a different thing. So I'm going to put it down to 3% and about 20% strength, and I can just start to wind back some, not all of it, but some of that lighter colour in the sky there. If I want to just reclaim carefully some of the blue. Now I want to be careful because if I go over this area, I'm going to remove some of that effect. So I just want to do this a bit more accurately, just to reclaim some of the blue a little bit. So just try not to go over where the trees are. Okay. Now I'm going to create another layer above that because I need to create the sun as well. But I'm going to switch again to the soft brush. I'm going to keep it at the, well, let's put it around the 10% size initially, and we'll stay at the 5% strength, and I'm going to continue using this yellow, but we do need to make sure that the new layer is also on the add. And I'm going to choose a center point for the tree here, and that's where I'm going to do the sunlight. So I can tap a few times there. It's really going to bring out that effect. I'm going to increase it from 10% to 20% and tap it about another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That'll do. I'm going to again increase it to 40% this time, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see it's really started to blend it in a little bit. I'll just put it one last time up to about 70% size. So it's really massive now. Still low opacity at 5%, and 1, 2, 3, probably too much. I'll take it back. 1, 2 is probably enough. So I can go back to my tree layer, and I'm going to switch to the artistic leatherwood brush, and I'm going to have it down at the 2% size and about 90% opacity, and I'm just going to start creating some foliage on these branches. Now it is going to look strange initially, but I'm going to use a similar effect to what I did for the background as a layer on top of this, just to start to blend it in a little bit better. But we do want some of the dark tone to contrast, so I need to put some of this in initially. So again, we're going to cover quite a lot of the branches that we've created, so you didn't need to do too many. So continue to add some foliage. You can see I'm using a little bit of a sideways motion for this, but whatever kind of tree you want to do will be fine. Maybe leave some gaps for the sun to shine through. Okay, so once you're happy with the general overall effect of that tree, I'll just go back in with now the airbrushing medium brush, back down to the 1 or 2%, and just refine up some of those branches just to make a little bit more sense of some areas. Just tidy up some of those branches if necessary, just for the foliage to have somewhere to literally hang to. Okay, so I'm going to create a layer on top of that. On that layer properties, I'm going to change it again to the add. I'm going to go to my soft brush again, change my color to that yellow again. Have the size of it down to about 6% and stay on the 5% opacity. And I just want to reclaim where the sun is. So I'm going over it a few times now, and it's going to knock that dark color back, which is going to work really well for us. And we just need to claim wherever the sun is. So I'm tapping it quite a few times, and you see it starting to knock back that dark color, create a yellow, and it just helps with the placement. Then I'm going to put it up. I'm going to do this quite gradually, up to about 8%. tap it a few more times, up to about 12%, tap it a few more times, maybe about 20% now, tap it a few more times, and we can keep building it up like that. So just keep tapping it until, again, it's going to start looking more dramatic for us. I'm going to put it up to about the 30%, tap it a few times like that, up to about the 30, well, let's go for the 40%, tap it a few times, and I think that's probably enough. But I'm going to change now to the white, and I'm going to turn the size back down. I'm going to stay on the same layer. I'm going to put the size at about 5%, and I just want to tap a few times with that white, and I really want it to be super strong in that area. It's pretty much going to obliterate most things just in that small area there. Back to the yellow, still on the soft brush, but I'm going to turn it down to about 3% size, stay on the 5% opacity, and I'm just going to build in from that sun now some rays, again pressing very, very lightly, but I'm bringing out some rays from that point. Now again, if you're not so good at doing the light touches, then turn the opacity down. So I'm going to put it down to 3% or even 2% and just see what works for you. Now the line should always join up to the center point. Now that is our vanishing point, if you like, for these rays, and I'm just going to start bringing them in a little bit to the left and then to the right. And then bring some more over here as well, so they can go further. Again, they always point back to that vanishing point of the sun. And then maybe some far-reaching ones over here. More lightly though. Obviously the stronger ones are going to be more concentrated in this area. Like so. I'm going to go to my layers, create a plus, or create a new layer by tapping the plus. I'm going to be using the soft brush. I'm going to go back to my colours at the top. I'm going to use this light green colour, so that is the 5th colour along. I'm going to set it down to about the lower part of 2%, and let's just test that. It's very light, so let's put it up to about the 20%. And again, just as we were doing before, I'm starting to build in some texture now. As we come further down, we're going to bring some of this texture in. In fact, I'm going to put it low. I'm going to put it to about 15% and even lower on the brush size to the lowest part of 2% possible. And I just want to create some like dimples and bits of texture in and around here. We're keeping it really nice and broken texture. So again, I'm just allowing my hand to glide across the screen while I'm creating some dashes, and I'm also trying to go up and down. So if I did them all in a straight row like that, it's going to look very artificial. So try and avoid that. So I'm bringing it across and I'm going up and down, and then I can pass over it again. I'm creating multiple layers of different texture, just basically trying to keep it quite erratic, quite chaotic looking. I'm going to create a layer above this and we'll come back to that texture, but I'm going to start adding some dark shadow. So I guess we need to use one of the darker colours. The black might be a bit much at this stage, so I'm going to go back to this colour, which is not quite as dark as that black, to the second colour, and using the soft brush still at 2% size still, and about 15% will work. I'm just now going to blend in the bottom of that tree stump, and I need to give it a shadow. We've got such a strong sunlight that it needs a strong shadow. So we have a branch here, and then we've got a middle section here. We're bringing it in, and obviously shadows, as they get further along, they start quite sharp near the source, the thing that's creating the shadow, and then as they get further away, they get more diffused and they get less in focus. So near the base of the tree, we're going to keep it nice and sharp, really quite concentrated, and then we can just turn the size of the brush up. So I put it up to about 3%, and we can just start to bring the impact of shadows over here. We allow it to extend quite considerably across this area. And again, I'm keeping quite rough with this really, because we're going to go in with a lighter colour in a moment anyway. So I'll go back to my colour that had the light green on it, and I'll continue with that light green, which was this one, 5th colour in, put it back down to the lower part of 2%, and we'll keep it at the 15% 2% opacity, and now I can just start to further exaggerate the shadows by adding more of the highlight textures where the shadows aren't, so in those gaps. So I still have to maintain the fragmenting. I don't want an absolutely crisp edge to that shadow, so I need to keep it quite rough. And we'll go in there with a lighter colour just on top. If we are getting too sharper an edge to a shadow, we'll go in and we'll break it up near the end, but I just need to go in and create some more of this texture. Also go in with the black colour palette perhaps, so I've got this dark black, and we're still on the soft brush at 2% size, and I've got it at, well, I'm going to put it up to 20% opacity, and I'm just going to start creating some extra texture. So as well as highlights, we're also going to get shadows and broken black texture as well, especially in this real foreground area. So really be rough with this. Let's put it up a little bit. Actually, we'll put it to 3% size. You're going to get some quite large shapes as we get closer to us. You can always go back in and break any dark shapes up with lighter colours as well. So keep alternating the brush size and just put it to the lower end of 3% there. And you can move quite quickly, reduce it down to the top end of 2% as we move further back. And we can keep doing that with the texture. As we get further away, we can just reduce the size of the brush. Again, just creating noise. So lower end of 2%. And as we go further back, then we're just going to see the smaller textures. Texture can be quite laborious, so settle in. You just got to take the time with it a little bit, and it does pay off because the more time you spend doing this, the overall effect will be dramatically better for the time you've put in. Now, in the distance there, I'm just going to do one or two, maybe just little anomalies, so I can put it down to the 1% size, perhaps still at 20% strength, and in and amongst that, all those distant areas, I'm going to have just some things that are sticking up, maybe like the larger features that are just catching the light or creating a shadow. You don't want it to be totally empty of features, but obviously most of the texture is here for the foreground, but you're just going to have some odd little bits. It does help if you just create some extra things there, just creates more interest in the distance too. But you're not going to do it in the very, very distance because all those little lumps and textures will just kind of disappear in the distance. Back up to the 2%, and again, a bit more concentration in these areas of texture. And I'm going to turn the opacity up to about 40%, and then you're really going to get some strong black textures, especially down near the bottom area here. So we can just create some slightly bigger bits here and there. Just keep moving across, left and right, up and down, wherever, if you squint your eyes sometimes and just look at what the overall effect is, then you can just determine, oh, that bit needs a little bit more, and then you just sweep up and add a bit more into that section. It just take a little bit of just sitting back, and though you can't see me, sometimes I do just lean back a little bit, judge the overall effect, kind of determine what areas are looking good, what areas feel a little bit empty, and then I'll just go back in and add more detail if it's appropriate. But you can build up quite a nice texture pretty quickly by doing that. You can see as I'm talking, as I'm doing this, I'm not really sped up too much, but it's developed quite quickly. So I'm going to create a new layer on top of that, and I'm going to go back to my colours. I'm going to go back to the lightest green. I kind of merged some of those layers together a little bit, and that's fine. But there was an area here where I wanted a few more highlights because it's not quite as much in the shadow, so I'm just going to exaggerate just a hint here and there in this section where it's catching the light a little bit more, and that's going to help. Perhaps I'll just turn the opacity down a little bit again to about 20%. Make sure I'm at the lower part of 2%, and just create a few more highlights in this section, for example. And then there's another section here that I think would benefit from a few more highlights. And again, I'm keeping it quite random, quite erratic. I'm not doing any blades of grass here, I'm just creating lumps and a texture. and just continue to add a few more highlights. And I do strongly encourage you to spend longer on these tutorials if you want to go into that level of detail, but I just need to try and show the overall construction, show you what's possible as efficiently as I can, and then obviously you can spend as much of your own time then really fine-tuning and perfecting them. And I'm just going to go back a few layers. There was a layer here and then another layer here. In fact, I go back to layer 9, it had some of that yellow colour on it, and I'm going to go back to my colours and use your yellowy colour, and I am going to continue to add some of that brightest yellow colour just to bring out a little bit more intensity of that colour. Maybe just a hint of it in between the shadows there, but again, sparingly. Maybe just a hint of it in these areas in the distance too. Now it's behind the tree, so I don't need to worry about it interfering with that tree at all. Maybe just a hint of that yellow. I mean, it's to be fair, it's underneath other layers now, but that's fine. I think the brokenness of it is probably a good thing. I can just add little hints of that yellow where I want it to really sell and ramp up the highlights in just one or two bits. I think that would be useful. Go back to layer 11, and I think I'd like, with the white and the soft airbrush, just put it up to about 8% size, 10% strength, and I think I'd just like to go in there a little bit in this section and just add a hint more to that bit there, and I think that brings that even further. I think that works better. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed following along with this tutorial. If you've had a go and you want to share it with me, make sure to tag me if you post it on Instagram, or share it in my Facebook group as I explained earlier, and you'll get feedback from not only myself but the other members there too. Hit the bell notification if you haven't done already, make sure that you're notified of any future tutorial, and I shall see you back here soon. Take care.